What's going on, everybody? Welcome back. It is week 3 coming up for the NCAA football season. So we are back with another edition of Friday Night Lights. Skipped on week 2, schedules didn't work out. Things pop up. Hey, it happens. You know, that's what happens when this is your full-time job and you're not getting paid. But as always, I am your host, Mo Murphy, with my co-host, Walker Bailey. Walker, what's going on, bro?
Not much, man. Not much. Excited for this weekend slate. Got a lot of good games. I'm gonna park on the couch on Saturday and probably not move.
And so I'm glad you brought that up. Some good games this weekend, right? Because there's a lot of college football fans that feel like this weekend is dry. Like, there's not necessarily matchups. And I feel like to understand how many good games, like there's probably like 4 or 5 what I would consider like primetime games. Like these are worth watching. These matchups are going to be telling for these teams for the rest of the season. But some people don't even see the matchups that I'm talking about that way. Like a team either took a loss or they're not interested in watching this team or that style of football. You know, the Pac-12 after dark matchup, which we'll get into. So I feel like you have to be a true college football fan to really enjoy college football outside of your team week in and week out. And I think that's what I think it brings light to that this weekend, because there are some great matchups that I really want to watch, and we'll get into them. But what do you think about anybody who's like, I'm not that excited, it's kind of a boring weekend, because they look at it who their team plays and they're like, we don't play nobody, so this weekend isn't really that great?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think people have to understand that, like, if you're watching the sport to watch the sport instead of just to watch your team, that like this thing's a process. Like, you know, there's going to be a learning process. A lot of teams that finish in the top 15 aren't going to be there yet. They may not even be ranked. Like, you know, like I think 5 o'clock on ESPN, I think like Mississippi State is playing LSU in Death Valley. Like, and to me, that's a good game. Like, that's a great game. Like, I'm going to be sitting down and I'll be parked watching that. Like, and to understand a lot of those types of like things, and to understand teams that maybe aren't where you or aren't in the spotlight yet, you kind of have to watch these early season games and understand, like, hey, this team has the talent to get there. And like, I'm sitting here talking about both LSU and Mississippi State, but like, you know, you have to understand that and then watch the game and be like, okay, this team theoretically is a top 15 team, but they just haven't won their way into those ranking spots yet. So like, that's to me, like, I think a lot of people look at the schedule and they look at, okay, what top 25 teams are playing what top 25 teams this week. And if there's only 1 or 2 of those games, then people are uninterested. And if one of those 2 games, like, you know, we're like one of the few top 25 matchups this week is a Pac-12 team versus an independent team, and no matter what the numbers are, those or what the rankings are, like those games aren't going to intrigue a lot of people. But the people who really, really love the sport, like that's a game that's going to be, I'll be on my couch. Ole Miss plays at 2:30, and Ole Miss is probably going on the silent TV while I watch BYU.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up. So before we get into that matchup, because that's the exact matchup that we're going to talk about first, but we're going to talk about week 2 and just kind of our overall thoughts on week 2, because we talk about one of the teams that play this weekend and we'll get into their matchup, but like their season could be over and we're only entering week 3, right? Like the hopes that they had on this team, Texas A&M, losing to Appalachia State, like you put all the pressure losing early as you have to win out. And I don't think Texas A&M wins out for the simple fact, like, bro, you still got Bama on the schedule. Then even if you were to beat Bama, like you'll probably, if you won out and went to the SEC championship, like you'll probably lose to Georgia. And that's thinking on the high end, like after losing to Appalachia State, who I think is a good team, shouldn't have beat Texas A&M. So when it comes out to it, like what are just your overall thoughts on week 2?
So if we're going to talk, I want to talk about A&M for a second, because we're walking through this scenario where A&M like gets back right, but I want to walk you through the scenario where they don't. And we've seen they only scored 31 points against FCS Sam Houston State to open the season. They only scored 14 points against App State. And I think what people miss is that 7 of those points were on a kick return, not on an offensive touchdown. So they scored 7 points on offense against App State. They play Miami this week, who's a top 15 team, and they're at home. Then they go to a neutral site to play top 10 Arkansas. They go on the road to Mississippi State, which is no gimme. They go on the road to Alabama, and then they play a 3rd straight road game at South Carolina before coming home to play top 20 Ole Miss, top 20 Florida, and then going back on the road to Auburn. That team could be like 3-6 in a few, like that team could be like 3-6. And then they still have LSU to end the season, the last week of the season. Like that team could be 3-6, and we could be having an entirely different discussion where this whole $31 million recruiting class or whatever is like, bro, like we got all this money, but we're 3-6. This is not what I signed up for. Like, and all of a sudden, we start talking about Jimbo's job security. Do they have the money to fire him? Do they have the money to fire the athletic director? Because it's going to cost $95 million to fire Jimbo, and I don't think they have that money. So do they fire their athletic director? Do people start hopping in the portal? Like, this is like an identity type crisis thing for A&M, where A&M better turn this thing around in like a week or two and get back on the tracks, because if they don't, this thing could really spiral, and like that's what I'm cheering for, because it would be really fun to watch. But that's kind of what they're staring in the face, because if you're losing at home to Appalachian State, any SEC road game is going to be a tall task, and then when your home games are against top 20 teams, it's like, well, I mean, this is going to be tough.
Yeah. And then so on week 2, I'm not going to hammer A&M as much. But like on week 2, Alabama skates by Texas, like literally skates by Texas. Is that a true, excuse me, is that a true indictment on Alabama? Like, I feel like it's early in the season. It's a tough matchup. Then something I pointed out prior to the game. Alabama is used to playing at 3:30 p.m. Eastern or night games. Not only was this a 12 o'clock kickoff on Eastern time zone, this was an 11 a.m. game in Texas, in Austin. Do you think like that had because you prepare different when you play at 3:30. You prepare different coming into a game when you play a night game. And Alabama doesn't play too many 12 o'clock kickoffs, if really any. Like they pretty much, their SEC team, most SEC teams, except the bottom barrel or something, they might catch a 12, but they're 3:30 or a night game. Do you think like having to prepare to wake up and play at 11 a.m., do you think that had an effect on how Alabama came out to play? Like, I'm not saying that's why they only won by 1 point, but to say that when I point that out before the game, and then the game is a lot closer than it should have been, probably could have lost if Quinn Ewers doesn't go down. Like, I think that's the narrative everybody is with, is that if Quinn Ewers doesn't go down, they win that game and Alabama becomes, they're a 1-1 team heading into week 3. But like an 11 a.m. kickoff game in the time zone that you're playing in, when you're not used to playing any earlier than 3:30, do you think that had a little bit of effect on pregame preparation for Alabama?
I mean, I don't know, maybe a little bit. I thought the most telling thing for that game, and the thing that I'm going to watch the next few weeks, like I don't think Alabama plays anybody this week, and I don't think they play anybody for a minute. But the thing that was telling to me was that they got their asses kicked in the trenches. Like, I mean, they got killed in the trenches. And, I've seen the whole thing. People are trying to do the indictment of Bryce Young. And I'm like, what were you watching? He's the only reason they won the game.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the just incredible plays that he made to keep plays alive and get them into field goal range to win the game. And like, I'm not saying he didn't make mistakes. I'm just saying that at the end of the day, when they needed to score, the only reason they won that game was because of Bryce Young. But I just thought continuously all day, Texas killed them in the trenches. The other popular take I've seen that I don't really understand is that it's like on the Texas side, they're fully claiming the moral victory for losing to Alabama, which to me, I think that's stupid. You lost the game, so you're losers. And then it's like, they're like, well, we just lost to Alabama by 1. Like, we're prepared to make this jump into the SEC. Like, we're showing you we're fixing to be contenders in this conference. And I'm like, no, I don't think people understand what, I hate to say SEC fans, but fans of SEC teams are telling you when they say that. It's not what can you do against Alabama in an isolated one-off game. Like, that's not what that means. It's how do you respond when you lose a gut-wrenching game against Alabama at home, and then you have to go play Arkansas and Fayetteville the next week, and then turn around and go play Florida or whoever else. And this isn't even like talking about going and playing Georgia or anything. Like, how do you respond when you have to go, you play Alabama at home one week, and then all of a sudden they're making you go play Oklahoma and Dallas the next week? That's what like people are talking about in terms of preparing for the grind of the conference. And it's something that we watched A&M not be able to handle for like almost a decade, and hell, they're still going 8-4. So I think that like Texas has claimed a lot of moral victories there, which I don't agree with. And I think that when you lose, you should just be like, you know what, we lost. And especially at Texas, because the goal at Texas is to win national championships. And if if your goal is to win national championships and be a powerhouse, which Texas has been, they want to be again, you cannot claim moral victories. But in the words of Jeff, all that matters is the loss column, and you lost. So I don't know that the start time had a lot of effect on Alabama. I thought they got dominated in the trenches by Texas, which is kind of scary going into a league where, you're going to have to play Auburn, who's going to have players in the trenches. Ole Miss is going to have players in the trenches. Arkansas, damn sure, is going to have players in the trenches. All these schools are going to have talent that's less than your talent, but they're going to have comparable talent to what Texas had. So I maybe the start time had some to do with why they didn't play well in the trenches. But that's what I noticed from the game. That was what my fear was with Alabama moving forward, is that if they are not better, especially offensively up front, then some of their schedule gets tough. I mean, they have to play on the road against Ole Miss, on the road against Arkansas, on the road against Tennessee, on the road against LSU. If you told me that they lost one of those games, I'm telling you right now that they're more likely to lose one of those games than they are to win all four, just based on what I saw against their first quality opponent.
Yeah.
So that's just kind of what I took away, was I don't think that they're bad. I think they're going to get better, and I don't think they're as bad as they played in the trenches on Saturday. I still think they're easily one of the top 3 teams in the country, but it was something that kind of made me raise my eyebrows, and was like, okay, we need to pay attention to this, because in 2 weeks they go to Fayetteville, and if Arkansas handles Texas A&M, both teams are going to be undefeated, and that's going to be potentially the biggest game in Arkansas's last 15 years.
Yeah.
And they're going to come with everything they have, and they're more talented than Texas. So
that's
what I'm thinking.
And then looking at Alabama, another thing that I've seen, and this is just me, I don't know how everybody else evaluates them, but they don't have the receivers that they've had for the past 7-8 years. When we go from Julio to Amari to Devontae and Ruggs and Judy and
Waddle, and like that.
Yeah, so we're so used to them having that true superstar receiver at the very least. And then, like you said, like I said, they went from Julio to Amari to Devontae Smith and Jalen. Yeah, so they just had, and some of those guys were all on the same team. Remember, Ruggs, Judy, Devontae Smith, and Waddle they was all on the same team. Waddle was a freshman, but they were all on the same team. And so now you look at their wide receiver group, and they don't just have those big play guys that's just going to make a difference whenever you need them to. It's going to fall all on Bryce Young. And I look at it it's not an indictment. This is hey, Bryce Young, everybody projects you to be the number 1 pick. You're lacking a little bit of talent at wide receiver, which is something an Alabama quarterback hasn't been able to say in a while. Go get the W. So go get the W against Texas. Go take this team to the promised land, because the expectation is national championship or bust for Alabama. It has been for the past 12 years for sure, since 2010, easily. Definitely in the playoff era. Just going to the playoffs and losing in the first round is not what Alabama expects, is not what Nick Saban expects. They made it to the national championship, had an opportunity to win, but they lost, and they're not satisfied. We talked about this going into the season. They're a team that's playing with a chip on their shoulder. That's scary when you go to a national championship and you're playing like a team with a chip on their shoulder. But some of the talent at the skill positions, defensively, I like what they got defensively, but offensively, they're lacking a little bit than what we're used to. They have a good running back, transfer running back, Jahmyr Gibbs, but I still don't think he's going to give you the production that we're used to seeing an Alabama running back have. They've been spoiled there at running back, for all the way from Mark Ingram, Derrick Henry, and Najee Harris. We could go down the line of running backs that they've had. So I think at these skilled positions on offense, they're lacking a little bit, and they do have a top, arguably the best quarterback in college football, a top 2 quarterback, I think, hands down. So he's going to have to carry them a little bit. And we've seen great quarterbacks in college be able to do it, but that's going to be the ask of Bryce Young on the offensive end. And then the defense is going to have to step up. Alabama may not win, especially in these top matchups. Like you said, when they go play Arkansas and LSU, they may not win the way everybody expects Alabama to win, which is high scoring and score a lot of points and be able to outscore them and flashy. It might be a lot of in the trenches, low scoring. We won 21-17, but we got out of there. Like, they might have a few escape victories. And it's not to say Alabama's schedule is also a lot tougher now than it looked like going into the season. So it's not an indictment on Alabama that they're not one of the three best teams. I still fully believe they are, but we'll just have to see. And they're going to put, those true stars that they have on their team, the Will Anderson, the Bryce Young, like, they gonna have to put it on their back, and they gonna have to show up week in and week out, and they're gonna have to make plays. Will Anderson's gonna have to make plays on defense. Bryce Young gonna have to make play after play on offense. So we'll see how that pans out for Alabama. But like you said, I still think they're one of the three best teams. I'm not gonna overreact over a game against Texas on the road. We know Texas still has a good team. They have higher expectations of their back, but we know that's a good team that isn't who you want to play in a week 2 scenario, especially when you don't have all your kinks fixed at this point in the season. So before we move on, I want to talk a little bit about just the fact that none of these top teams dominated last week. Like, Ohio State didn't dominate Arkansas State the way you thought. And I was, me, bro, like we're supposed to win by 50 or whatever, but it wasn't going to be a quality win regardless. We could have won by 50 and it really didn't matter. Like, Ohio State was as long as Bama or Georgia didn't lose, Ohio State was staying at 3 regardless. But even Georgia, like, only winning 33-0, like, they played some scrubs too. Like, so only winning 33-0. Yes, they shut them out and they scored. But I think, like, the approach of, like, the Georgia and Ohio State last week was, let's get in here, get the win, and get out. Like, it's a home game. Like, let's just win. Let's get out. We're deemed one of the 3 best teams until one of us prove otherwise, which means we are going to be 1, 2, and 3, no matter how you put it. And I think Georgia has that mindset. We're going to be 1, 2, or 3, and we control our own destiny to the playoffs until we cough up one. Winning 33-0 is not going to be an indictment. We're not going to drop. Look, they won 33-0 and jumped to number 1. All you got to do is win. Like Jeff said, only column that matters is the loss column. So all you got to do is win. And so I look at it like, I feel like that's how Georgia treated the game. I feel like that's how Ohio State treated the game. Is that kind of what you took away from some of those top teams that didn't handle business the way, like, at the end of the day, as long as you win and look even decent, because you're not going to get style points for beating a team 77-0. You're just not. Like, it matters none.
Yeah, so, like, I mean, it's kind of interesting because I look at these things in a different light this season than I have in the past. I listened to Lane Kiffin in a press conference down here at Ole Miss because Ole Miss opened with Troy and Central Arkansas. And, like, I don't think he was intentionally throwing shade at those schools, but he said, we're treating these like preseason games. He is like, this is where we go in, figure out what we have, who's going to play where, what works, what doesn't. We're going to be very vanilla in the game plan. We're not going to do a whole lot. We're just going to get in there. We know we're going to win. We're going to get in there and play our guys and figure out what works. And then once we get to about the third quarter and we're up by, 28, then we're going to get guys out of there and we're going to just move on and do whatever. And so, I mean, I think that for the first time, like, coaches are being a little bit more honest about that. And, like, that's exactly what people are doing. It's like, yeah, we're going to come in and we're going to go full bore for 2.5 quarters. And then the score is going to be out of hand because we know we're playing teams that can't stay on the field with us. And then we're just going to be done. And we're going to put in our backups and then we're going to let them play and do whatever. We're going to get better beyond just our starting 22. And so, I mean, I think that Ohio State and Georgia and anybody really who was playing, Ole Miss playing Central Arkansas last week. I mean, I think that any schools like that are treating them like preseason games. I mean, they're going in and securing a win, and then they're working on stuff. They're trying to get better because they know what's coming down the road, whether, in Ohio State scenario, that means the college football playoff, or Georgia with an SEC slate or the college football playoff, or anybody else, preparing for a tougher conference slate or a tougher college football playoff run. Like, I mean, I think that's how teams look at it. It's like, we have to prepare because we know what's coming down the road. And if we don't prepare and we just treat these as, all out games, we're A, going to get people injured, and we're B, going to be worn out towards the end of the year. So when they have the opportunity to treat games like preseason games, then they're going to do it.
Yeah, 100%. And that's why, like, I even seen, like, you could tell, like, the way Ohio State, and that's the game I watched where, I really paid attention to it. And I'm like, Ohio State kind of played real soft on the game plan. Like, okay. But then when it's like, all right, we're giving Arkansas a little too much confidence, like Marvin Harrison Jr. go score a touchdown. Like, so you could tell, like, okay, they think they're within striking distance. Abuka, go do what you do. Like, give you a reverse, go run it for 40 yards. Like, So I feel like, they knew like we'll make the big plays and we'll make this game get out of hand whenever we decide. And so like coming swinging in the second half, like boom, 2 touchdowns just like that. And it's like, well, you just look at the whole first half of Ohio State struggled and didn't take care of business. And you're like, and it just got carried away just like that. And then after that, we started running the ball and bringing the backups and let them play a little bit. But I think it was one of those, like they had a game plan where they're just like, at the end of the day, we know when we want to score, we'll score. And so we're not just going to show everything. But it's also one of those, like, I feel like with Ohio State, like when you have the same head coach for so many years, you're not hiding nothing. Like everybody, like every coach who's game planning, like, oh, I don't want to show this or that. We didn't implement a new offense. So I do sometimes get real weary of like, bro, just sling the ball around the field for the first half. Get Marvin Harrison Jr. 3 touchdowns and Ibuka 2 touchdowns. And, if Smith Najigba was playing, get him a touchdown. Score 4 or 5 touchdowns right away and then call it a day. Like you're not showing anything by showing Smith Najigba could go 60 yards for the score. You're not showing anything that Marvin Harrison Jr. could go up top. Like you're not ruining a game plan. That's just, let the individual talents be individual talents. Be great. Let's end this game. So, and like I said, when you have the same head coach, like if you look, Ohio State, I watch them and everybody watches them. They run the same offense. They run cross routes, whatever, They just have the talent that you can watch film all you want and think you're going to stop it. And boom, that's when we'll hit you with this. But you don't have to worry about like just run your cross routes and let your guys catch the ball and take it down the field. Like you're not ruining anything. Michigan didn't get one up by showing that against Arkansas State. Like Michigan State didn't get a one up on that. Like Ryan Day, you played with the same philosophy for every year. So you doing that early doesn't get a one up on you. That's where I get a little, but that's just me being hard on Ohio State. So we will move on from week 2 because this is the week 3 preview and we're going to get you to, I know, probably mine and Walker's game of the week. Walker's made me buy into this team, BYU. They go on the road. They play Oregon. This is a Pac-12 after dark game. So all you East Coast and Central people who like to stay up late should
2:30 kick. 2:30 kick.
I thought it was a night game.
Pretty sure it's a 2:30 kick in Oregon this week.
I thought it was a night game.
I think it's a 2:30 kick. I'll look, but
hold on. Let me you know what? I might have made the mistake and
2:30. It's 2:30 kick. Got a little,
it was originally a night game, though. This game,
I don't know. I didn't look until yesterday, but it's a 2:30 kick.
Okay, well, I could be wrong. It could have been 2:30 the whole time. Okay, so take all that back. Yeah. This is a middle of the day game.
That's how I want it, though. I want it during the day. I need the easier environment on the road.
Yeah, but it's a during the day game. Yeah. BYU versus Oregon, so that makes it like an 11:30 kickoff over there. Like. Because they're 3 hours behind. So, well, no, that makes it 12:30 because it's 2:30 our time because we're Central. But anyway, that's besides the point. BYU plays Oregon. BYU is plus 3.5. I'm not sure. I know like the decision was expected today on whether both of their receivers are playing. I don't think they've officially been ruled out, but I think the expectation is that on BYU side, they won't get their 2 receivers back. But I look at how they handled Baylor. And that doesn't make me change my mind on BYU against Oregon. But here's my thought on this game before I give it to you. These are 2 teams that I think have a lot to prove. And it's crazy where you're saying, like, what does BYU have to prove? Like, BYU has a schedule that they could be the Cincinnati of this year. Like, if they were to go undefeated, they're an independent school, so they don't have that but if they were to go undefeated, they have the type of schedule playing Baylor, who was top 10 when they played them, playing Oregon, who was ranked. Doesn't BYU have Arkansas this year too, or am I tripping?
BYU's got Arkansas, and that's in like 3 weeks.
Yeah, so BYU has Arkansas.
And Notre Dame.
And Notre Dame, which the Notre Dame game kind of goes out the window a little bit. I think at this point, it's not the same as going into the season. We're looking at BYU, and if they handle business in all these games, they're undefeated. What kind of position will put the playoff committee in on whether to put them in? But I think that's what BYU needs this game, just like they needed the Baylor game. Like they keep their playoff hopes alive when you look at their schedule. Like it is a possibility. But with Oregon, like Oregon got smacked by Georgia and lost essentially a lot of respect for their conference. If you really think about it, like they got smacked by Georgia. Utah loses in the same week against Florida. So now everybody's like, the only viable team is USC. And the minute USC stumbles, like the Pac-12 is once again out of the playoff hunt. We're not even thinking about the Pac-12. So I think it's big for both. I think Oregon has an opportunity to get some respect back for the Pac-12 here in this game, especially after BYU coming off a top 10 victory. And then I think BYU could continue their playoff hopes and keep their playoff hopes alive winning this game. So going into this game, what are you looking for? I know what you're looking for, but what do you?
I will say I was just searching around on Twitter just to see if I could find injury updates, and it says that they're both game time decisions, but they both practiced all week. So if they both practiced all week, so I'm gonna guess at least one of them is gonna play, and they may not announce it until 1:30 Central Time. Like they may be like, "Oh yeah, he looked good in warmups. We're gonna go," just so Oregon can't prepare for it. I think it's almost strategic. That's if someone in the building doesn't leak it to ESPN on like today, like they did last week, where they leaked it like 2 days before the game. But point being, this is a different test for this BYU team. Like this is a last week with Baylor, you knew they were going to be tested physically, and anybody who stayed up and watched that game, it was a physical football game. I mean, it was in the trenches. Baylor tried to do exactly what they did to BYU last year, which is dominate them in the trenches, run the football. The difference between last year and this year is that BYU did not even remotely fold. They held up in the trenches. When it came down to it, 1st and goal at like the 5, they got a false start and got to stop in double overtime. I mean, stop the run 3 consecutive plays and 2 consecutive plays and put them in 3rd and long, 4th and long, and won the game. So I was really impressed. I didn't know or didn't suspect that BYU had that level of physicality up front. I thought that once we got into the 4th quarter and that thing stayed really close, and I thought Baylor might impose their will a little bit, but BYU kind of never buckled. Offensively, Jaren Hall was a lot better than I kind of figured he would be against an elite in a Dave Aranda defense, no less. Some of the throws he made in that game were like, okay, like come April, we're going to talk about this guy at the back end of the 1st round. Like the throw right before halftime where he just put it in a bucket at the back pylon was nuts. And so going into this game, though, it's a different test because I think Oregon, is not going to be as physical as Baylor, but I think they're going to present more speed problems. Like I think it's going to be a game where BYU is going to have to prove that they can keep up with athletes going, east to west, north south, and kind of prove that they have the team speed to keep up with a team like this. So it's a different test. I mean, I think I tweeted like Monday that I was taking BYU plus 3.5. So, I mean, I think they have it. I think that this team continues to be underrated in the market. I think the AP poll has it about right, even though I think that they're, like I've said since the beginning of August, that this team was going to be a playoff contender at the end of the season. So, and if you win this one, this is your last, you get Arkansas at home, you get Notre Dame in a neutral site, but it's on the West Coast. So you have a really good chance where you're probably not going to be an underdog in another game for the rest of the season. And all of a sudden you're looking at, okay, is BYU going to be this team that's an independent that goes 12-0 and has potentially 4 top 25 wins at the end of the year, where you go, okay, man, like they beat a Baylor team that's incredibly physical. They beat an Arkansas team out of the SEC that's incredibly physical, and they've played really well under Sam Pittman since he was hired. Notre Dame's bad currently, so I don't know how much credit they'll get for that. But, and then this is another one where it's like, man, they went on the road, even albeit a Pac-12 opponent. They went into a stadium where a lot of people have gone into and seen dreams die over the course of the last few years. I mean, it's a tough place to play. It's probably what you think consensus one of the top 10 home environments in all of college football. Yeah. And they went in there and won. So this is just another test, I think, where they have to go and they have to prove it. I think it's going to be interesting to watch how Jaren Hall plays on the road versus at home, because it's a different beast when you go on the road. So I think that if they get the weapons back, they should win. I think that the defense is vastly improved. I think that they can, especially with Bo Nix at quarterback for Oregon, I think you can force a couple turnovers. The biggest question for me is how Oregon handles the level of physicality, but like a bump or two down from Georgia. Because like Oregon not competing against Georgia is not an indictment of what Oregon can be for the rest of the season. Yeah. It just means that they're not a top 4 team in the country. That doesn't mean that they can't be the 10th best team in the country and just be a shell of what Georgia is. Like those two things can coexist. They don't have to be like Oregon doesn't have to be just an absolutely atrocious football team. But the early returns on Oregon are that offensively, they haven't been explosive. Even last week, they played someone silly and they weren't able to be explosive. They have to be methodical. They have to move the ball and go, 10 plays, 75 yards. They haven't shown the ability to crack the big one. And coming into games against teams that are going to be ranked in the top 25 like that, if you can't be explosive and create big plays, then I don't know how you win. Like, you
Right.
have to be explosive. We've seen that over the course of the last 10 years in college football. The teams that win have the ability to generate explosive plays and be explosive. And even last week, BYU against Baylor was able to generate some of those plays. Even in a slobber knocker physical game, both teams generated those plays at times.
Yeah.
So if Oregon has to be methodical all day on Saturday and they have to just try to go 5 yards, 7 yards, 8 yards, do whatever else, and they don't crack any long plays, I think BYU is going to win the football game. If Oregon can find a way to be explosive, then I think that home field can take over in the fourth quarter and they can win the football game. I think it's more likely that Oregon just kind of is what they are, or they are what they are, because their OC who just got hired was kind of the same way at Florida State. They weren't able to be super explosive either. I just think they may be what they are. I kind of like BYU here, so I'm taking BYU. I think they win, and then I think we get in a weird place where when Arkansas comes to Provo, it's going to be like, if they win this is going to get very uncomfortable nationally, because it's like we were in position where we thought we were going to just put 4 Power 5 champs in easy, no conversation, when Notre Dame was bad, and all of a sudden, like, this little train that could out of Provo is just coming in absolutely wrecking shit everywhere.
Yeah.
Like, they're just kind of just mowing down, because I mean, if they beat Oregon, they have the best resume in the country through 3 weeks. Like, nobody is going to have that level of wins. Nobody's going to have that level of, Oregon would fall out of the top 25 with a loss, but at the time they would have 2 top 25 wins.
One top 10.
Yeah, and a top 10 win against Baylor. So,
yeah,
and one would be on, and they wouldn't both be at home. One would be at home, one would be on the road. So I'm a firm believer. Like, I'm all in. I mean, I've been all in since the start of the season, but now they actually, they got the win against Baylor, and so now I'm like all in. Like, I'm ready to roll. I'm hoping we see this team in the college football playoff at the end of the year. I think they can get there. I think they're good enough to do it. That's where I'm going. I think we'll talk about Jaren Hall as a first round pick come April. So.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see a lot of that as a possibility, but I ain't got much to follow up on that as far as BYU, Oregon. You broke it down. So we're going to move to the other top 25 matchup before we close out with like some off the radar games. We won't spend too much time on this, but for me, University of Miami versus Texas A&M. Texas A&M coming off a bad loss. We beat up Texas A&M. I'm not going to focus so much on Texas A&M in that loss, but they're coming off a bad loss. They got this game at home. And this is a primetime game. University of Miami is on the road to show that they're viable to be playoff contenders, essentially. Like, I know right now where they're ranked, they're 15? So, like, nobody is going to look at them as playoff contenders. But if they were to run the table and they started here by beating Texas A&M, like, they could beat a Clemson in the ACC. Like, I will say, if Miami was undefeated ACC champs, like, they probably get in the playoffs, or there's an argument. I mean, I guess, if BYU's undefeated as well at the end of the year, and Ohio State's undefeated Big Ten champs at the end of the year, and we have an undefeated SEC champ, and let's just for sakes, like, USC is undefeated Pac-12 champs, like, now we have a conversation. But this is the first chance to prove that you could be a playoff contender. I understand you're not playing a playoff team in Texas A&M, but you're playing an SEC team prime time on the road. This is your biggest challenge. You have a star quarterback in TVD. You struggled last week against Southern Miss last week. Like, they struggled for the first half, but they got it together and basically got out of there with the win. And at the end of the day, that's all that matters. Had they blown out Southern Miss, I still don't think you could, in those type of games, and I've always said, you'll never get looked at in a positive light coming out of beating Southern Miss 77-0, but you'll always look at them in a negative light if they don't handle business. So it's a lose-lose situation, or it's just a lose situation. If you don't look great, you lose, and nobody values you the same. If you look great, nobody cares, because it's like, all right, you play Southern Miss, you handled it. If you're supposed to be one of these top teams, you handle business, nobody cares. Keep it moving. You're ranked the same next week. Prove it against Texas A&M. And I think this is the opportunity where University of Miami has a chance to prove it versus Texas A&M. I think what changes my opinion on this game is that Haynes King will not be the starter this week. It will be Max Johnson. And so I don't think Max Johnson is that great, but I think he's better than Haynes King, and I think he adds a different dynamic to help out that Texas A&M offense. Texas A&M is favored by 6.5 right now.
Yep.
going into this game. So people do see this as a bounce back game for Texas A&M against University of Miami. And this is probably going to be the most hostile environment they play this year, is unless they, I don't know if they have Clemson on the road or whatever. I really don't know University of Miami schedule for the rest of the season, but this is probably the most hostile SEC team, night game, prime time. Everybody's watching. What are you going to do? And that's basically the question that University of Miami is going to do. Prime time, SEC, on the road. What you going to do? Are we taking you serious, or is this going to be another year, Mario Cristobal's first year, but is this going to be another year where we look at Miami in a positive light coming into the season, thinking that they could do some things, and then boom, because Miami's not going to get, I know Texas A&M coughed one up, but that's exactly why Miami's going to get no credit for losing a close game to Texas A&M. Like, they have to win this game because it's still like you lost to a team that lost to Appalachian State. People are going to play that card when evaluating Miami, especially later on in the season. Like, so Texas A&M has messed up the possibility of how great this win could be, or this close loss if Miami ran the table for the rest of the year, because at the end of the day, you lost to a team that's probably going to have multiple losses later on, and you lost to a team that lost to Appalachian State. So going into this game, what are you looking at?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm looking to see how Texas A&M responds. I tweeted from the OTB and Bets account that I was taking Miami earlier in the week. I wish I could undo that. I really do. I wish I could undo that because I already took him. I can't take it back. But I kind of figured Haynes King was going to be out there, and it was going to be same old Texas A&M. I upgraded A&M a good bit with Max Johnson playing quarterback. So I just kind of look to see how A&M responds from an attitude standpoint, from a mentality standpoint, and then what is Miami going to do coming on the road? Because you got to think about it. They're an East Coast school going and playing an 8:00 Central Time kickoff in a 110,000 capacity stadium. So there's going to be 110,000 people, and for Miami, that's going to be like a 9:00 kickoff. I mean, you got to bring it, and this is the ultimate. You have to bring it, and I don't know if I could go back and do it over again, knowing Max Johnson was going to start. I've got A&M, and I've got A&M big. I think that I really think they respond. I think Max Johnson is stable. I think he can complete. I think he can complete throws. I think he can just be average. And when you can be average with the talent that Texas A&M has in the trenches and with the running backs that they've got back there, that's really all you need. They just need to respect the guy that's throwing the football. And right now, you don't have to respect. You didn't have to respect Haynes King. You could load the box and dare him to beat you over the top, and he couldn't do it. He was only pressured, I think I saw, in 3 of 34 dropbacks and still couldn't make throws.
Mm-hmm.
That's which again makes me question why Jimbo ever started him to begin with. But that's why I'm sitting here thinking, all right, we've seen what Max Johnson can do at LSU. He's led some decent LSU teams. He's proven that he can play. He's not going to win the Heisman Trophy. He's not going to do anything like that. But he's a solid, stable quarterback. I think A&M wins, and I think A&M wins relatively big. I think it's low scoring. I think Texas A&M's defense kind of makes a statement, dominates the line of scrimmage, puts a lot of pressure on Van Dyke all night, and I think A&M wins something like 24-7. And we look back on it and we're like, oh damn, that game could have been worse.
Yeah.
So I think A&M responds. I think they win fairly big. I think they cover the 6.5 under Max Johnson. Now, if Johnson goes out and Haynes King has to play again, whole different story. But I think Jimbo kind of recognizes he need. Now, granted, I will say this from an A&M standpoint: changing quarterbacks does not change the outlook of this team from an entire season standpoint. You still have problems, and the problems stem from the guy that holds the play sheet every day. The refusal to adapt and modernize your offense. It's a lesser version of what we've seen happen to Mike Leach.
Yeah.
Because at some point, people start covering you and can prepare for you when you're doing the same thing every single week. So, with all that being said, I don't think that matters this week. I think it's a big bounce back spot. It'll be at home. It's going to be a raucous environment. There's probably a chip on the shoulder. They got snubbed from game day after game day basically was like, you lost to App State. So we're going to send game day to App State and go broadcast from App State, the school that just beat you, and take away all that, attention and, marketing ability from your school. So, I think there's probably a chip on the shoulder of everybody in that building where they were like, all right, you know what? The whole yell leader thing that's gone on this week. I think there's probably a chip on the shoulder. A&M's been probably the most negative storyline in the entire sport through 2 weeks. I really think that they're going to respond here. They're too talented not to. They've upgraded at quarterback. I think they're going to get up for this one in a pretty big way. And I think they win it in pretty dominant fashion.
Well, you heard it here. Walker's taking Texas A&M. I think I'm going to take Texas A&M. I don't know about a dominant fashion, but I just think it's a tough environment for University of Miami. And I'm just not sure they're there yet. Like, I'm not sure they've been able to really implement the Mario Cristobal Miami team. I know it's a breath of fresh air having a new head coach, and I think the future is bright for the University of Miami, but I just don't think it's bright right here in week 3 of the first year of him coaching. So before we close out, I want to talk about some off the radar games, some games that you're going to be watching, checking in on, or whatever that people might not be talking about. So I'm going to throw this out there because I want to hear your thoughts. Mm-hmm. Can ODU just ruin the state of Virginia this week and beat Virginia? They're 8.5-point dogs. You called them beating Virginia Tech. So we don't have to break the game down, but I seen that they played and I'm like, can they just run Virginia this year and beat Virginia Tech and Virginia?
I don't think so. I don't think they have the offensive capability to get that done. I think Virginia is going to score enough points to win that game. I think they maybe keep it close, but I would lean Virginia getting the win by, 7-14, 10-14, something like that. I don't think they get it done, but I do think it's an interesting one to keep an eye on. I do think that it's going to be harder for Old Dominion to get up going to Virginia. And also it's a 1:00 game on a Saturday versus playing in a primetime standalone spot on a Friday like they did against Virginia Tech. I do think it's a tougher spot for them to get up and get a win. I think it's an interesting game, but I think Virginia wins by 10-14.
Yeah, I just had to get your thoughts on that. So another game that I'm looking at, obviously I will be watching the Ohio State game. I don't think anybody needed to question that. Regardless, I don't care who plays at that spot. We play Toledo at night and I will be watching because it's my team and that's just what I'm going to do. Don't really care about all the other better games. I catch them when I could catch them, halftime or whatever. But another game is Michigan State versus Washington. I think that game's not getting talked about enough. Michigan State is ranked number 11 playing a 2-0 Washington, and Michigan State are dogs going on the road to the West Coast in a night game to play Washington. I think Washington is a little bit better than people projected. Obviously, Vegas thinks they're a little bit better than people projected because they have them as favorites going into this game. I think I'm rocking with Michigan State. I think they're the better team. But if you're going to give me points from a betting perspective, I would take Michigan State plus 3 or 3.5, whatever it is. Yeah. I think they're the better team. But it's always and I know, like, when you see these teams go on the road to the West Coast, it's just different. It tough, just man. Is. And Washington, they love their college football team. I won't say it's the hostile environment of like going to LA and playing against USC or traveling to Utah or traveling to Oregon, but it gets loud there. I've been able to see Washington play at home and like they love their teams. You see how it is when the Seattle Seahawks, Washington's right down the street. They right there. Right down the street. And so it just is tough when you go that time zone change, and having been a person who's lived on the West Coast and bounced back and forth as far as going back home or whatever, it's harder being the West Coast team going on the East Coast because you're 3 hours behind. So if it's a 12 o'clock game, like it's 9 o'clock your time, you need to get out there early and get adjusted. It's a little bit easier for Michigan State being an East Coast because you're playing a 6:30 at night game, but it's still 3:30 your time mentally, physically, as far as if you haven't adapted to the time change. So I don't think it's not as hard, but it's still just tough going to the West Coast. Like it could be raining. It is September in Washington. Like this game, it could have some rain. It's going to be a little bit cold. I know Michigan State comes from a cold weather state as well, from the state of Michigan. So, but that's a game I'm keeping an eye on and paying attention to just because like, I think that could be a really good game. And I mean, if Washington was to win, like, that makes the Pac-12 look a lot better because Washington will be 3-0 with a win over the number 11 Michigan State out of the Big Ten. So if you look at it, like if Oregon was to be able to come out of here with a win this week, if Washington was able to beat Michigan State, like I think, and then USC obviously handles business against Fresno State. Like I think we value the Pac-12 a little bit more again, like because you'll have a 3-0 Washington team who will be ranked, guaranteed. You have an Oregon team who will jump up a little bit in the rankings at 2-1, and you'll have a 3-0 USC team who everybody's buying into right now and seeing as possible the likely fourth playoff team right now. So I think the Pac-12, you remember when we talked about like week 1, the Pac-12 could be like washed by the end of the night. But
and they were.
Exactly, they were, but they have an opportunity here to be right back with a little bit more respect by the end of Saturday night. So the minute we watched them, they only watched for a week in week 2, but come week 3, like we could have some respect on respecting the opponents that USC has to play and having a 3-0 Washington, and maybe they cough it up later on down the line, but at least for week 3, like I think the Pac-12 is set up to get some respect back on that conference, at least for the rest of this season. So what is one of you, before we close out, what is one or two of your off the radar games that nobody is not getting the national attention, national spotlight that people won't be paying attention to?
Yeah, we talked about this earlier kind of privately, but I want to see how Texas gets back up for UTSA because like UTSA is going to be their Super Bowl, or this is going to be their Super Bowl for UTSA. I mean, they are the University of Texas at San Antonio. They're playing the mothership. Like they're playing the school that they were named after, essentially. Like they're going to Austin, and like Jeff Traylor's got a good team down there. He's got a veteran quarterback in Frank Harris. It's a team that really wreaked a lot of havoc in the Group of 5 last year. I want to say they went undefeated regular season or 11-1 or something like that.
Yeah,
it's a quality football team with a lot of guys back. You know that they're going to get up. Texas is only 12.5-point favorites, so I think we're going to learn a lot about Texas as a program. How do you get back up after the big one-off game? You played the number, whatever you want to call them, 1-2 team in the country, and now you've got to turn around and do it again. You have to bring it again. How does Hudson Card look in a start against UTSA instead of pinch hit duty against Alabama? That's what I'm curious in, because UTSA is going to bring it. They're going to probably have a decent number of fans. They've been selling out the Alamo Dome this year, so like they have a fan base, a real fan base.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they're going to bring people. I'm just interested to see how Texas gets back up. And then I mentioned it right off the top, but I'm really interested to see, you don't often see teams go into Death Valley and be laying points. And Mississippi State is going into Death Valley and laying points. And I think that's Vegas speaking to how highly they think of Mississippi State this year. I think Mississippi State's a team we could be talking about later in the year as like a Sugar Bowl top 10 to 15 team. They've got a third-year quarterback in elite system, which is always dangerous because he knows the system. He's running it precisely. They've got a lot of skill talent. And you know how Mississippi State is. They're always going to play defense. So they're creative defensively. They're going to throw a lot at Jaden Daniels, throw a lot at LSU. And if they go down to Death Valley and get a win, things kind of get interesting where I'm like, all right, I'm paying more attention now. You beat your 2 cupcakes. You blew out Memphis. They went from Mississippi all the way to the West Coast and blew out a Power 5 Arizona team. Now Arizona sucks, but they're still whatever. I'll give them a little bit of credit for that. So if they go to Death Valley and get a win on prime time at night in Death Valley on ESPN, I'm going to be like, okay, we've got to pay a little bit more attention because clearly, odds makers, Vegas, people who know what they're talking about, think really highly of this Mississippi State team. Bill Connolly at ESPN, his SP Plus rankings have Mississippi State in the top 15. So I think that's a team that we're not talking about enough that's going to be really good, led by our veteran quarterback in a system that once you learn it and can execute it is really effective. And they've adapted a little bit under Leach. So I'm intrigued to watch that game. And if Mississippi State wins, then I think it's a team we're going to have to pay a little bit more attention to.
Yeah, 100%. So y'all have it. We gave you our week 2 thoughts from last week. Talked about BYU versus Oregon, University of Miami versus Texas A&M, and gave you some of the off the radar games, games that you should probably be paying attention to, especially if you're trying to find your way into being a huge college football fan. I think this is a solid week to do that and kind of appreciate and be able to check out some other teams that you typically wouldn't watch because they're not all top 25 matchups coming from both ways. So on that note, make sure you go follow Off the Ball Network at OTB_network on Twitter. Make sure you follow OTBN Bets on Twitter. Walker puts out his daily bets. Ken puts out his daily bets. They put out daily parlays with Rob, Ken, Eric, and Chris. Myself, I'll be on the weekends more for football. I'll probably be in a lot more like when football and basketball merges and something catches my interest every day. At that point, and then you'll have college basketball. So we'll be rolling 3 sports, daily parlays, daily picks, daily plays. So make sure you check that out and check out everybody over there. Go to offtheballnetwork.com and make sure you just check out everybody over there. We got great writers like Nick Andre. We got guys who are revving up to cover basketball like the Hoopers, Knicks fans wilding. Like, just shout out to everybody at Off the Ball Network. So on that note, Friday Night Lights, we'll see you next week. We'll give our thoughts on week 3, how everything panned out this week, and we'll get you ready for week 4 because there are some key matchups come week 4 that a lot of people will be looking at and looking forward to, and that includes my Ohio State Buckeyes with their first real test on the road. So on that note, Friday Night Lights, we will see you next week.